Welcome to Week 3, Specialized Research. Once you move beyond U.S. borders or into certain ethnic groups, specialized resources are often needed. The same resources one would use to research early settler ancestors don't necessarily work when one has to cross an ocean or look for ancestors not documented by traditional government record keeping. You may get lucky and find foreign census records, but often church records, land grants, and inheritance records will be the most common sources. Educational records for males may also be found for the larger institutions. Special collections holdings may also have some surprises. It is hard to be knowledgeable in all areas of genealogical research to the same degree. When you focus a great deal on one area, there may be other areas in which you may need someone with outside expertise. As a white woman married to a man who is part Native American and working at a traditionally Native American institution, my expertise is guided by my personal experience. To account for my bias, I try to utilize outside expertise in certain research. The following videos share some tips on research in areas outside my personal expertise.
Hello, I'm Nika Smith, and I'm here to help you detect the lies when it comes to African American genealogy and family history research. The first lie is that African Americans were not documented before 1870. 1870 is a significant year because it was just 5 years after the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, except in the case of involuntary servitude, and 1870 was the first year that all African Americans, regardless of if they were free or they were formerly enslaved, had the opportunity to be enumerated on a federal census. So because this was the first time that all African Americans, in theory, were given the ability to be enumerated as a person, as a human being, on the census by name, by age, by sex, location, all these things, a lot of times when people are starting their genealogy research and they can only get back so far, many of them hit a brick wall when it comes to the 1870 census. Here's the thing. If you have an ancestor who was on the 1870 census, you've got beyond the 1870 census. Another myth, or sort of half-truth, is the fact that people believe that African Americans have more Native American DNA or Native American ancestry than they have European ancestry or DNA. And in my experience and the experience of others who have been doing this type of work for a number of years, the preponderance of evidence is out there. African Americans have usually more European ancestry than they have Native American ancestry. But the fact of the matter is there were Native American groups in this country that actually owned slaves. There were slaves among the Cherokee, which is a group that a lot of people will shout out that they have ancestry from, or the Creek, or the Choctaw, or the Chickasaw. Those groups practiced chattel slavery. My ancestors were actually slaves of several Cherokee slaveholders and prominent people. They were also descendants of those same people. Alright, since I'm here to help you find the lie, here's another one that's quite a doozy. There's this myth going around that slaves did not marry. Yeah, okay. Seriously? Anybody who has been to an African American wedding or has saw one online or even looked at pictures knows that there are a bunch of us who actually participate in a ceremony known as jumping the broom. It happens after the vows are said, the prayers, the sand ceremonies, ropes, drinking, bittersweet, whatever you did when it comes to your wedding. But at the very end, after you're pronounced husband and wife, or wife and wife, or husband and husband, a broom gets brought out and the couple jumps the broom. And this tradition was passed down as a part of our culture during slavery. Now, granted, because slaves were not necessarily considered legal citizens or were given the rights of legal citizens because they were considered property, they may not have had the ability to actually have their marriage solemnized by the county or the parish or the state. But you can find records of slaves getting married in a number of different places because it was considered a holy sacrament. It was something that a pastor or a priest or somebody had to preside over. I've heard experts on television quote this as though it's the law, and I'm here to tell you that it's not true. Another lie, myth or perhaps half truth is the fact that people think that African Americans cannot trace back to Africa, meaning that they cannot directly trace their lineage back to an African country, group of people, or anything like that. And that is so untrue. There are a number of ways that people can do this. Primarily, folks are using DNA to do these things right about now. Also, when you look at early records, early census records, you're looking at church records, anything you can pull, some of these records will actually tell you that a person was born in Africa, even though they were living in the United States. The importation of slaves was banned in the United States in 1808, but slaves were still illegally transported here well after that date. So it is possible that you have a 19th century ancestor that was actually born in Africa. Another lie is that African Americans were not involved in the U.S. military before World War I. Oh boy, gosh, seriously? Seriously? Have you seen the movie Glory? That's a pretty big indication that African Americans were in a war or served in the military prior to World War I. Statistics say that there's at least 1 out of 4 of your ancestors that exist, if you're African American or if you're researching an African American family, that were in the Civil War. If they lived long enough or they had a wife or children, they were able to receive a pension from the federal government if they got sick. And so these records are available at the National Archives. You can order them online. They cost like $75 now. But they're chock full of information, and they can help you further dispel the first lie I talked about, which was that African Americans were not documented before 1870. If you'd like to hear more from me when it comes to family history research and genealogy, be sure to subscribe to my channel and check out some more of the videos I have here on YouTube.
I'm Mary Torres from Harlingen, Texas, and I'm president of the Rio Grande Valley Hispanic Genealogical Society and vice president of the Tip of Texas Genealogical Society, also in Harlingen. So I'm well immersed in genealogy. Oh, this is a very exciting time for people doing Hispanic research. There's so much information coming online that wasn't available prior to this. The tips that I would offer for someone getting started would be basically the tips that you have for doing any genealogy, any ethnic group. Start with yourself, work backwards, interview all the relatives you can find, and document everything very, very, very well. I think one of the mistakes that a lot of us make is we're so excited when we get started that we're gathering all this information and not noting where it came from, and then later on you're duplicating your efforts. But that would be my advice. And one of the major pieces when doing Hispanic research would be to find the location that your ancestors came from. It makes researching so much easier. And you generally will find that when you're researching on this side. Most of us start our research in the U.S. with census records and then work backwards. And in doing that, you're gathering information. You're learning who your parents and your grandparents were, and it gives you a lead, a clue. One of the major pitfalls would be the naming system. A lot of times women did not take their husband's last name. They retained their maiden name. And like in my case, my maiden name was Ozuna. Married name Torres, I would be Mary Torres Ozuna. And then my children could choose to take whichever name they wanted. So it takes a lot more digging, a lot more research to really identify the people that you believe are your true relatives. My favorite online resources are, of course, Family Search and Ancestry. I've been an Ancestry member for many, many years. And those two are my major sites. I also use Genealogy Bank. I use a variety of other resources, NARA, different. There's so much out there right now, you just have to dig for it. Well, I think the majority of the records, if we're looking in Mexico, are ones that we find through family search. It's difficult to go into Mexico right now. I know people have gone into the National Archives in Mexico City, and they feel fairly safe because you can fly in and out. I live right across the border, and there are very few places that you can go and actually do research. We depend on materials that people in Mexico have written. We have several people that have written lots and lots of books from their research in archives. Yes, with the Rio Grande Valley Hispanic Genealogical Society, we're a very active group. We meet monthly. We have a speaker at every meeting on some Hispanic genealogy topic. We've written several books. We did a book on oral history interviews with the veterans in the local area. We've done a book on short stories. And one of the exciting projects is our indexing. There are people that have transcribed records, or are there original records that have not been photographed or transcribed, and we're working on that. We have produced some books, but we're still actively indexing. And one thing that I'm really proud of is our new Getting Started with Hispanic Genealogy Research. This book came off the press just last week. We have not seen these in any of the conferences that we've been to, and this basically gives you an idea of what we're about, and it talks about the naming patterns and where to look for records. So this will be available for sale on our website.
Hello everyone and welcome back. This is Angela at beginninggenealogist.com. Today I want to talk about the basics, well not necessarily the steps as yet, but give you a basic overview into researching Native American ancestry. There are several questions I'm going to answer in this video. Number one, can Native American ancestry really be traced? Number two, are there records? Are these records hard to find? Where are the records located and what are the resources? And are there limitations to this process? First, can Native American ancestry be traced? Absolutely. But the issue is that many people think that it's something that's hard to do. It's not any harder than anything else that you research. You must have a research strategy, you must have a plan, and you must understand what the records are. And again, the records themselves, this is sometimes a surprise, and I get this question all the time. Well, gee, where am I going to find these records? Where am I going to go and find these rolls to look at? First of all, the records are there, and this is the surprise. The records are the same records that you use right now as a beginning genealogist. You're hopefully utilizing vital records, birth, marriage, and death. You are utilizing the federal census. You're beginning in 1930, 1920, 1910, 1900, and going back in time. Well, this is oftentimes a surprise because many people will say, well, you know, they didn't take a census of Indian people in the 1900s. Yes, they did. And this is oftentimes a surprise. And, well, my ancestors decided to pass under another identity because they lived such painful lives if they would remain as an Indian in the community. Well, sometimes that's not really accurate. There are many Indian communities that are intact, and I'm not just talking about places in the Plains states, but there are many people who are alive and well living within an Indian community in the Carolinas, in Virginia, in Mississippi, in parts of the Midwest, in parts of the Northeast. There are communities that are still intact today and have never stopped being what they are. So sometimes people think that there's a challenge because people suddenly went underground. There are records to be found. You're already using those records, and it's very important. Now, there may be true that someone decided, as it happens in many cases, there are individuals who their ancestry was African American, and at some point they moved away, and maybe because of identity and appearance, they've decided to take on a different type of ethnic identity. That can happen, but you do not find entire communities of Indian people doing this any more than you found entire communities of African American people doing this either. So you don't want to start out your research with certain assumptions. The strategy is to use standard genealogical methodology. You're going to find your ancestors. There is a trail and they can be documented. Are the records hard to find? No. The records exist, and as I said, they're the same records that you use right now, but outline your strategy and you will be able to go. And also keep in mind you want to go step by step. Oftentimes a step is missed. Someone may say, well, I don't need to get my grandfather's death certificate. I have him documented in the census. I know who his parents were and I want to keep going further back in time. However, you do want to get your grandfather's death certificate. Again, you want all pieces of data on all of your ancestors that can be found. Leave no stone unturned. This is very, very important, and you want to do that. Sometimes the informant, just who the informant was, can give you some important information. And furthermore, if you have an ancestor who died in 1940 or so, or maybe died in a year before you were born, and you live in a different state, the death certificate also provides useful burial site information. So you still want to get those documents as well. And then where can you find these resources? Well, since you're using the same records, you're going to go to the same places to find them. Wherever you find census records now is where you're going to find census records that reflect Indian populations and individuals even so. And many times looking at census records, there are three types of communities you're going to find people of Native ancestry documented. You're going to find them in Indian communities, in the general population, which I would call a mixed community, and then you're going to find them in blended families, in mixed families, where a family is documented in the general population on the general census schedule, but the household itself is blended, and you'll see different ethnic background that would appear on individuals in the same household. And that does happen, and you do see those. I will say a word about the census records. You will find individuals certainly identified as being of Native American ancestry in 1930. You will find them in 1920. 1910 and 1900 years are particularly significant, particularly because there was conducted by the U.S. government a special Indian census, and this was conducted exactly at the same time of the federal census. You will find it oftentimes, and this sort of answers the question if they're hard to find. If you've gone through a family, you found them in 1930, 1920, but can't seem to find them in 1910. You go through the county where you know that they live, line by line, you go through. Well, when you get to that last page where it says this is the end of the enumeration of such and such county, as opposed to going back and looking again, if you've already done it at least twice, continue to scroll in the microfilm. The special Indian census usually begins after the general population census has been completed. And there you will oftentimes find individuals that you're looking for. Also, another place to find the records, and again, it makes the search to an extent a bit easier, is to look at your online researches, your online resources. I'm referring to Ancestry.com, great place to find information, Heritage Quest, Family Search. Take advantage of those resources if you have them, if you have a subscription to a resource such as Ancestry. If you live near a genealogy library, well, that library has an Ancestry subscription, so you can utilize that as well. So basically, I'm simply saying that the records are there and they can be found. You'll notice that I did not mention individuals on certain tribal records such as Dawes records, Guion Miller Rose from the Eastern Cherokee or Mississippi Choctaw records. Those I will address in a separate video. And I will simply say that right now, for you as a beginner, utilize those beginning resources that you're already using right now. And you're going to be surprised what you're going to be able to find. It's just an overview for you, and let's get started now researching this part of your history. Take care. See you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
My name is Ken Bravo. I'm the Vice President of the International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies, and I'm also past President of the Jewish Genealogy Society of Cleveland. Well, when I speak on Jewish genealogy, I go through a number of those, and what I call them is the Bubby Mices of Jewish genealogy. Bubby Mices is a Yiddish term. A bubby is someone's grandmother, so they're basically old wives' tales. And there's a number of them, but most prominent is, I don't know what our family name originally was, or our family name was changed at Ellis Island and I don't know how to find it. Well, first of all, family names were not changed at Ellis Island. And if you learn how to do research, you can find generally, not always, but I say generally, what the family names were. There's also, our entire family was wiped out in the Holocaust. Not true. In many instances, somebody survived, or some bodies survived. Well, I use some of the standard ones. I use Ancestry.com. I use Family Search. There are some. I use Jewish Gen, for example, which is a very good resource for finding families, researching towns in Eastern Europe and elsewhere. And it's led me to some very good results. You can also post in there what family names you're looking for and what cities, so if somebody is looking and wants to find you, they can, which has actually happened to me. If your family is connected some way to the Holocaust, obviously the Holocaust Museum is a great resource. Yad Vashem in Israel is a great resource. I was able to make the connections I made because the records at Yad Vashem led me to a living person who had knowledge of those people. Joining a Jewish genealogical society brings you in contact with other people who have interests similar to yours. But they're also a great resource. So there'll be people that you will meet at those meetings, members of the group, or we bring speakers to our group on a monthly basis in Cleveland, and other Jewish genealogical societies do the same. And so you can learn a lot. And if you have questions, there are people you can ask those questions of who can help you find the research. In fact, in Cleveland, the end of March, we're doing, our Jewish Genealogy Society is doing a program for beginners. So we're going to get 20 or so beginners and teach them, kind of the nuts and bolts, as I call it. My maternal grandparents, my grandfather's brother was married to my grandmother's sister, but they never came to the United States. They lived in a town in Belarus. I knew when the Nazis got to that town during World War II, and they killed all of the Jews in the town. I had looked on Yad Vashem, which is a memorial in Israel to the Jews that were killed in the Holocaust, and has a lot of records, including what people can submit called pages of testimony, which describes people who were killed. And I had looked for my grandparents' siblings. I don't know how many times I'd gone on that site and looked. And then one day I looked on the site, and all of a sudden it started popping up for me. And there they were. The records had been submitted by somebody who I later tracked down to be living in St. Petersburg. Using Google, I found her son, and so Google is a great also, you don't think of it as a genealogy resource, but it can be a great resource. I found her son. He worked in sort of a think tank there. He had been to a conference. There was a roster of people who attended the conference. I got his email. I wrote him. I told him the story. You know, my grandfather had a brother. My grandmother had a sister. Here are the names. He wrote me back, "It's us." And we communicated. About a year after that, I went to St. Petersburg. They were actually on vacation in Helsinki at the time I was in St. Petersburg, so I came back through Helsinki and met them. Through them, because you have two families there, because my grandfather's brother and my grandmother's sister, I found information on both families, including a woman who lived in Brooklyn, New York. She's in her 90s. She was a retired surgeon who had practiced in the former Soviet Union. She was not killed because she was in medical school in Moscow when the family was wiped out in Borisov, Belarus. So that's one exciting example. This past summer, I was in Israel and met up with relatives on the Bravo side of my family, and it's a young woman who is doing the research there. She is in her mid-20s. She just got out of the Israeli military as an intelligence officer. I kid her and tell her she's now applying those skills to genealogy. But her grandmother had her grandmother's wedding announcement. Name was Bela Bravo. She was a sister of my great-grandfather. And because women, obviously, when they change their name, are harder to find, she tracked me down through Jewish Gen because she saw that I had posted there I was looking for Bravos from the same town. And we made all these connections, and we met up in Jerusalem this past summer.